Magic Mayhem is a third-person shooter game with RPG-like systems and a setting that allocates the player in a medieval and futuristic world.
The game uses multiple mechanics and systems, but the most important and primordial of them are the leveling up and the elemental mechanic. The leveling up system we use is important to the development of the game, since with it we had enemies that will scale with the player, making replayer more challenging and a game that can be recycled. The most important mechanic, by the other hand, is the elemental fighting. Since the start of the game, we know what we wanted. With the elemental system, we knew we had a good mechanic that ended up being the most important one. With this mechanic, the player had the option to deal damage based on which element he chose for his spell. The spells were based in 4 elements the nature has. For example, we have water, rock, and wind. We wanted to use a system similar to rock, paper, and scissors, in which one element will be stronger against another element, while being weak to the others. This way, we had the player more focused on and attended to which element he or she is using while playing the game. When we started this project, we had kind of a big idea of what we wanted, and started the project with a completely different type of game in mind. First, we wanted to have a hack and slash game, but due to limitations on what we could do and what we knew, we had to change the system to the third-person shooter, which was a great idea, since we had many new effects that we could use thanks to a bundle pack we had that allowed us to have multiple spells in the game. We also had multiple mechanics we wanted to use, but ultimately we couldn't get them to work, or had problems in development. Like a good example, my hook. The player was to have a hook that could use to attract characters or get the player itself to traverse the world. But after much trial and error, I realized that there was too much to complete. It would have required us to change things we already had in place.
Of what went right within the game. Most prominent of all of them is the snake boss. Having a dynamic boss fight that attunes to the player's level and then adjusts to them accordingly, allowing the boss to gain more moves as well as upgraded abilities and statistics. This allows the player to get comfortable with the fight in the first encounter on a more easily basis, and then progress into harder difficulties where they have to fight a stronger enemy. One of the things that did not go so well in the game was the creation of a sword and shield mechanic. This was due to many individuals creating their own scripts to use for creation of attack damage, damage from the sword, different enemies conjuncting with the health of the player, and then how the interactions between all those scripts worked with each other. This was overcome by later implementing a shooting mechanic that we all had created and worked upon to be able to understand how it worked. And then from here, we also expanded upon it by adding different elements that each do different elemental abilities, and then furthering the system to then have individuality using a mechanic for on contact rather than changing the weapon the player had. As for what the team learned during the process of this, we learned primarily the interactions of NPC behavior, so creating real live map data for navigating, and then doing that real time for baking so that when a player spawns a new room or a new room gets added in, such as the one from here where there's a gap between the two, that is due to this map on the right being added after the map on the left is already there. And so figuring out how to make that happen while the game's running was a process of its own that we were able to take away. Alongside that, within navigation is the interactions between multiple AI and how to get them to work together to go accomplish the goal, in this case attacking the player. Alongside what else went right, we also had main camera world space to screen space interactions, where the camera then is showing what the player sees, while also being in the world at the same time to be able to give an understanding of what the player is directing and looking at when they're targeting and trying to shoot something.
So one of the cool features we have in our game is there's an enemy called a Reaper. And the Reaper will only appear when it detects a player and you turn your back to it. As you can see, he's about 2 meters away. Now if I move towards this wall, I have nowhere else to go. The Reaper has followed me. If I get the camera out of range, it will turn around and look towards me, like so.